All right, guys, welcome to week 10 of Intro to Music Business. We're going to talk about unions. Probably my least favorite subject, and honestly, something that we're not real sure in the future if it's even going to be needed. But that doesn't mean it hasn't been a part of the historical music business, and so it's definitely worthy to talk about. So we're going to talk about that, and we're also going to talk a little bit about my friend's book, Why I Failed in the Music Business. I have a lecture from him also up. He gave a little talk on his book, and so I put that up as well. It's a good book, good read. But okay, unions. Oftentimes, especially when it comes to the arts, unions are sometimes called guilds. Um, a guild is simply an association of professional persons with similar interests. It's like I said, it's especially in the arts, it's synonymous with a union. A lot of times, the main purpose of a union is to give the workers within an industry some sort of leverage with the firms and the companies that they work for. Prior to unions in the United States, um, there was no power because the individual was just the individual in the organization. So the organization is this big thing, and you're just one little individual. Really, all a union is all the little individuals that work for an organization organizing and coming together to use that as a collective leverage. In that, they generally have a collective bargaining agreement. Any of you that are into sports, you hear about that all the time. The NFL Players Union or the NBA, they have a collective bargaining agreement. What a collective bargaining agreement is written, legally enforceable contract for a specific period of time between the management of an organization and its employees, represented by a union. So let's use the sports thing. So every few years, the NBA Players Union sits down and they negotiate a collective bargaining agreement with the NBA based on TV money, based on sales at the gate, any number of factors. And it's literally just a negotiation. There really are no set. You have to get this amount, or you can only do this. You could a union could sign a horrible deal, and if you're part of the union, you've agreed to live with it. If not, you know, um, so it's basically just a way, once again, for the employees to get power. What a collective bargaining agreement does is it sets down and defines conditions of employment. What are we going to work for? What are the conditions we're going to work under? How are we going to get paid bonuses? What about vacations, benefits, and then a procedure in case a dispute comes up? So this kind of comes from when the United States was an industrial nation, and some of the environments in which employees were working were pretty poor, poorly lit, working way too many hours, dirty, not getting a lunch break. So the unions formed what a collective bargaining agreement or labor agreement or union contract, all sort of synonymous, to make conditions better. There are things called union stewards, and they're basically like, continuing with our NBA reference here, they're like the players' representative. They are they're elected by their coworkers to act as the on-site union representative. They're the ones that go to the company and say, we are going to we need to negotiate about this, and that's any problem. That's not just the collective bargaining agreement. That's any dispute. They're the ones that go and take care of that. They're generally responsible for handling, like I said, grievances, disputes, overseeing that, make sure that the terms that are agreed upon are actually the terms that are being lived by. Um, there's this thing in unions called the right to work. It's legislation that allows a person to work at any place of employment without joining the union as a condition of employment. You can. This kind of goes back to the Jimmy Hoffa days, and you can look up Jimmy Hoffa and the Teamsters for trucks. Is that it got to the point where they needed a union. They needed the union to be strong, so they would strong arm people, literally, physically, and verbally threaten them into joining the union, or they would make their life so miserable that the people would quit. The right to work is basically a law that says you can't do that. You can't bully somebody into being a part of the union. So we've talked a little bit about why unions started, and I've touched on it. It basically comes down to this. To put it more simply, there was obviously an imbalance of power. The organizations, the companies had all the power, the employee had none. By coming together, the employees gained power. They gained at least somewhat of an equal foothold. Um, you know, like I said, and when the United States was an industrial nation, we are moving from a manufacturing industrial nation. We've basically almost completely moved to a service economy. Working conditions really aren't that bad anymore. And unions can really cause problems. For example, in Nashville, the Musicians Union has a baseline for what a session player has to get paid in order to get a session. That sounds wonderful. I'm not sure what the numbers are anymore because I don't deal with the union. I don't, and here's why. Let's just say it's $300. So a basic session, no matter what, they got to get paid $300. A session is typically 3 to 4 hours. So you're talking about between 75 and $100 an hour. There's several problems with this though, and that is if you're part of the union, you have to get that amount. You can't play on a record for your buddy for free, nor, especially with technology now, many studio musicians will record, for instance, bass parts on their computer at home. They don't actually go to the studio anymore. So they're at home in their underwear, and instead of spending 3 hours setting up and getting sounds, they've already got their home set up, and they record, and it's done in 15 minutes. Well, me, as somebody who hires session players, I don't want to pay you $300 when you're sitting at home in your PJs recording on your computer. Now, the sound is going to be great. I'm going to pay you, but I'm not going to pay you $300. If they're a part of the union, they cannot legally take that work unless it pays union scale. And the second thing with that is nobody's selling as many records as they used to. So everyone is cutting budgets. And the union is just archaic in the fact that it doesn't deal with it doesn't deal very well with the new music industry. It doesn't deal with the fact that if you record home on your computer, it doesn't treat that session any different than it does if you go to the studio and set up for 2 hours and play for an hour. So being in a union seems like it's always a great idea. It's not. Their purpose is this. Like I said, no one worker can stand up, but collectively they can. If they stand up together, then they have leverage. Um, you know, the leverage that management has or the company has is they can withhold your pay, or they can hire in what they call scabs, people who aren't union to work. But the workers can withhold labor, and really where unions were effective is when the workforce was skilled. Much like the musicians union, the studio musicians are skilled. They're the best at what they do. So while you can go hire somebody else, it used to be that you're not going to hire somebody as good. That's not true anymore. Most musicians don't join the union anymore. And so people from the union side would say, well, that's why the union is not as strong. Someone on my side, my personal opinions are coming out here, I don't think it's much of an issue. The Musicians Union in the United States, speaking of them, is called the American Federation of Musicians. That's the most powerful one. There's others, obviously. And they're basically the political lobbying group for musicians. It has about 90,000 members. They say that they work for all of us. In some ways they do. I will talk about a benefit. For instance, if you're flying, doing a fly date, and you want to take your guitar, you want to carry it on, and the airline tries to refuse you, the AFM, the American Federation of Musicians, actually got passed through law that they cannot refuse you to carry on your guitar. And you can actually, I've heard of people carrying that legislation, the proof paperwork with them, showing it to the airline and saying, you cannot make me check my guitar. I can bring my guitar on. So that is something that, yes, they did, and it benefits all of us because carrying a guitar on is much safer than checking it. They also provide protection from not getting paid. If you are a part of the union and you do a gig and someone stiffs you, they will go after them. Now, that's only for people who are part of the union. If you're not part of the union, you're not going to do that. They all do also provide opportunity for health care and pensions. So let's get back to what I said. Are they still needed? It's debatable. There's two sides, obviously. My personal opinion has come out in this, but it's debatable. They can hurt you getting gigs from the minimum pay, like I talked about. They're behind the times, like I talked about. Um, but they can provide protection and health care and benefits. Legal protection's big. A lot of musicians get stiffed. Um, the unions, though, in general, are on the decline. It peaked in the 1950s. Around 35% of all the workforce was unionized. Today, it's about 9%. So, 91% of people working are not a part of a union. Big business has gotten better. Like I said, working conditions are better. Um, but there's also legislation that passes that gives businesses unfair advantages over labor, too. So while conditions are better, I mean, nobody really goes into a place in the United States anymore and doesn't have enough lighting to complete their job. As far as bargaining power, such as like Tennessee is in Tennessee, and there's other states that have this. You can be fired from your job without reason. It's basically a no cause state, which means you don't have to have done anything wrong. They can just let you go. In other states, they have to give a reason. Now that doesn't keep them from firing you. They can say the reason is the company's not making any money and we can't afford to keep them. They can say that, but they at least have to state a reason why. Uh, how that affects the employee is when you go to your next job, if there's a stated reason why, and it's obviously not your fault, then that helps you get another job. If there's not a stated reason why, it can be anything. It can be everything from, you punch the boss in the face to you did such a great job that your position is no longer needed. You literally solved the problems you were there to solve. So, but it's not going to say in a no-cause state they don't have to give a cause. So it can hurt you getting another job. Canada's union density also peaked at about 30%, but it remained level. So in Canada today, it's about 30%. Other nations, Sweden has the highest, 78% of all workers are a part of a union. Ireland is 35%, and England is 26%. One of the differences between the American and Canadian systems of organized labor is how workers can organize. American systems of organizing, if we had it more like Canada, called like the Employee Free Choice Act, passed to the House of Representatives in 2007, if that would have passed the Senate, we would have more, our system would have been more like Canada's. Unfortunately, it didn't. That's why theirs has remained level. It's kind of a different system now. So that is unions. I know this was a short talk, and like I said, it's short for a reason because we're not real sure if unions are going to be needed in the future. We're just really not. But it's important to know the past and to know why at one time they were needed. So that is the talk on unions. Make sure you take notes and make sure you do your quiz, and we'll see you next week.